You're tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
So if you've ever volunteered on a political campaign, you know that volunteers are the lifeblood of them. I mean, as someone who's run for office, I can tell you firsthand, even though I didn't win, you don't get anywhere without volunteers. And when people talk about their frustrations with the politicians that are representing them, the big question is, okay, what have you done about it? Have you helped out on a campaign? Have you tried to get someone elected? And there's a fantastic group in Canada called RightNow, which has done exactly that. It's made by two pro-lifers, Alyssa Golob and Scott Hayward, who, and I've known both of them for years, frustrated that pro-lifers weren't really moving the goalpost down the road and having more people represented in politics and in Parliament. So they said, let's connect volunteers with pro-life candidates, pro-life volunteers with pro-life candidates. And I, in the interest of disclosure, had support from RightNow volunteers when I ran for office a couple of years ago. And I don't blame them for my loss. Don't worry, Scott. But the fact of the matter is they are now being targeted by the Commissioner of Canada Elections for possibly violating election law for helping candidates in the federal election in 2019. We haven't heard of anything like this being directed towards the many left-wing groups like labor unions, for example, that were doing very similar things for left-wing parties. Scott Hayward, one of the co-founders of RightNow, joins me on the line now. Scott, good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Andrew. Really appreciate it.
So let's be very frank here. The third-party rules, I know, changed the way that a lot of organizations had to navigate just election law. You complied with all of these regulations. What is the problem right now?
Yeah, so the amendments to the Canada Elections Act came in basically at the tail end of the last Parliament, late spring of 2019. So we are already actually involved in getting ready and getting volunteers ready to actually participate in the 43rd general federal election when the legislation came in. So we took a look at it to make sure that we were in compliance of it. And I mean, we don't know what the allegation says. Elections Canada won't reveal that to us, or who made the allegation or the basis of the allegation. But what little we know from Elections Canada is that the allegation essentially states that we violated the Canada Elections Act by providing volunteers to pro-life candidates, winnable pro-life candidates. So the main crux of the issue, I suppose, is that within the Canada Elections Act, it says that a registered third party cannot provide non-monetary contributions to political parties or to candidates in our case. But back in the summer, when I took a look at the new legislation, it specifically said under the definition of non-monetary contributions that volunteers were excluded from that definition, meaning that a third party could provide volunteers to candidates. And so I reached out to Elections Canada back in the summer of 2019 to make sure that this was fine, what we're about to engage into. They got back to me. They didn't give me a definitive answer, but it heavily indicated that it should be all right. It seemed to be okay by reading the legislation for what it is. It seemed to be okay by reading through their 70 whatever page guide for registered third parties. And so we were quite surprised when we received the letter in mid-February, and knowing that a lot of other organizations out there, such as a number of unions, were engaging in same or similar things, we were quite surprised that we received that letter and that they were investigating us.
And I think that the two real points of offense here, not only that you're being investigated for just engaging in the political process, but that you have to defend yourself against an allegation that you're not quite clear on. So I know that this letter I read in the National Post has compelled you to produce documentation. Well, how do you even know what they're looking for if you're not seeing the scope of the investigation?
Yeah, precisely. It makes it very difficult to cooperate. So to give a bit of a timeline to everyone out there, we received a letter in mid-February from Elections Canada saying that these allegations were made and that they'd be opening up an investigation. They would not be pursuing criminally, and that the conclusion that investigation could include monetary penalties against RightNow. So they were asking for documentation on the allegation. So we said, that's great. What is the allegation so we can provide the documentation to defend ourselves against the allegation? Also, are you looking into these other organizations, such as a number of unions, that are basically doing the same or similar things, and often cases went above and beyond what we did in terms of providing, in terms of providing support to a variety of candidates across the country. Elections Canada got back to us, late April, basically reiterating the same thing. And then we got back to them the next day with the same the same answer, saying we're happy to cooperate, but we're needing to know, what the allegation is, who made the allegation, and the basis of the allegation before we know what to provide you, because we're not just going to give carte blanche to an outside organization of everything that's within our organization.
That's so important, and I know that Ezra Levant is facing something very similar, where he sat down with investigators and had no idea what it is they were actually looking for, and I know other people have had similar frustrations with this investigative body. I have to ask you, when they are investigating you, and you may not know the answer to this, but is this just them checking off their box because they got a complaint, or do they have the ability to say, when they receive a complaint, this is a nuisance, we're not going to advance it?
That I actually don't know. I don't know if Elections Canada has the ability to whether or not to decide they're going to pursue an investigation when an allegation is made by an individual or by another registered third party or political party. I actually don't know the answer to that. It seems to me, by reading the letter, that it was a decision of the commissioner to pursue an investigation. So I'm thinking there is a little bit of leeway there, but I don't 100% know the answer.
What is the impact if something like this proceeds, in your view? Because I know that there could be by-elections coming up, there could be another election at any point, and for any group, not just yours, how do you take what's happening?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question, because I think there's two different sets of what impacts are going to be. There's internally for our organization what the impact will be, and there's externally for our organization and everyone else. So internally for our organization, we're small, but we're mighty. We have 2 people on staff. The reason why we have 2 people on staff is because that's all we can afford. We were founded just over 4 years ago. Since then, we've had tremendous success, but we're an organization that brings in just over $200,000 a year. We're not a multi-million-dollar organization. So internally, what this impact will have on us is making sure that we have good legal counsel. I'm a chartered professional accountant. I'm not a lawyer, nor is my colleague, the other co-founder. So we have to retain good legal counsel. And if you want good legal counsel, that does come with a bit of a price, which is fair enough. And if there are any monetary penalties, set against us, and we'll decide what to do at that point if it comes to that. There comes a real cost with that. So that's what happens to us internally. Externally, if the decision by Elections Canada is that we're in fact in contravention of the Act, which I don't know how, given how the Act is written, it will have a chilling effect. And I agree with Andrew Scheer on that. I think it will have a chilling effect on not just our organization, other pro-life organizations, but other organizations who might be pro-abortion, other organizations that specifically only support one political party. So it could be unions supporting, Liberals and NDP candidates, or environmental groups supporting Green Party candidates. Have a chilling effect right across Canada as to whether or not people actually want to engage in the political process by knocking on doors for candidates that support their values and support policies that they like. And I think that's a very dangerous road to go down in a democracy, and it quickly leads to a country, not really being a full democracy. So I think it does have it could have some quite significant negative impacts, both internally and externally.
And I obviously don't want to downplay the financial toll that this could take. And I mean, just by virtue of fighting it will take on RightNow. But I think that the bigger point here, and I think you touched on that very well, is that it's meant to shut people up. I mean, worse than you having to fundraise to pay a penalty is you not being able to do the work that you set out to do.
Yeah, and we'll go down that road if it comes to, we'll cross that bridge. So it's really in Elections Canada court right now as to what they're going to do with this. I would not be surprised if they do come down with penalties and say, well, you were in violation of the Act. I don't understand how any organization out there, whether they be a union, whether they be pro-abortion, pro-life, an environmental group, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, firearms groups, I don't understand how any of our organizations can get involved politically. And if our organizations who represent the interests of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Canadians, can get involved in the political process, then our democratic function as a country is really, really going to go downhill, I think.
Well, and the fact that the act, as you understand it, specifically excludes volunteers is the most important part here. There seems to be an understanding with this that volunteers are the backbone of elections. And that's why if someone volunteers on a campaign, it isn't something that's an in-kind contribution. It's not something that has to be declared. It's just there. So the idea of even if a group's facilitating it, I don't think it is changing it that much. I know that with my campaign and with other campaigns I've seen, it's not all that uncommon for a group from a church or from some community organization all band together and say, hey, we're going to go out and knock on doors. And that's not a gray area. That's just how campaigns work.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important. Like, ask any like you said, Andrew, ask any candidate, regardless of political party, who's ran for public office, how much they rely on volunteers, specifically volunteers from various organizations and various groups out there. That those candidates represent those values and represents those policy positions that those particular groups find supportive, and that's how a lot of campaigns operate. Again, whether it's a Conservative Party of Canada, a Liberal Party of Canada, it doesn't really matter what political party. They do, to a large extent, rely on a variety of groups and issue-based organizations out there to provide volunteers for their campaigns in order for them to seek and win public office.
So what's the timeline that you have on this now, the next steps in this process with the Commissioner of Canada Elections?
We really don't know. So we sent a letter dated April 23rd. They said in their letter to us, dated the day before, April 22nd, that they give us 2 weeks to, cooperate. And we sent a letter back the next day saying we'd like to cooperate, but in order for us to cooperate, we need to know what we're cooperating with. We need to know what the allegation says. And we haven't heard back from Elections Canada. So it's really in their court. I have no idea what the timeline is. I don't think there's any timeline that's laid out in the Act or in the regulations to the Act. So we're really in a dark place in that regard for the timeline.
Now, would your ideal scenario here be that they just kind of rip up the letters, rip up the file, and pretend it never happened? Or are you looking for a fight just to kind of make that point that what you do and what groups like you do is not only important, but really essential to the political process?
I think that if they interpret the Act objectively and reasonably, the way is written in the spirit of it, that this case would be closed already. And I think that would probably be the best thing, both internally and externally. Like, the fight is already out there. The media, such as yourself and others, are already picking up on it. Mm-hmm. And if they don't pursue the case, then obviously that would be an indication that the type of activities that we and other organizations out there that are engaging in are within the confines of the Act, that we're operating legally within the Act. And that's probably the easiest, quickest, cleanest way for everyone to move forward here.
And just to be clear, there's no advertising component of this as far as you know, because that was the area of the third-party rules that most people were focused on, and certainly that was the area that I was paying attention to when we saw the rules come out in the first place.
Yeah, the big thing for creating the whole point of registered third parties for general federal elections with advertising, whether it be on Facebook, TV, newspapers, all that sort of stuff. Our organization didn't engage in any advertising during the RIP period, so we didn't have to, declare any. But there was a bunch of other things that we had to declare. And we didn't spend a whole lot of money on the election. Our return is on the Elections Canada website. It was under $10,000. So, it was quite encumbersome. I'm not going to lie. It was quite encumbersome to do the reports, to file the reports, to go through the reports, to go through the Act, to go through the guide, which was more confusing than helpful. And I say that as a chartered professional accountant, by the way. It's quite encumbersome for a lot of groups to go through all these, bureaucratic loops to just engage in the political process on behalf of the hundreds of thousands of people that we represent. So, yeah, it's interesting for the advertising, because that's, to me, seemingly why all this stuff was brought in. But the side effect of it is that it affects quite a few different organizations out there that aren't really that interested in advertising when it comes to getting involved in federal elections.
Now, I know that you don't just deal with elections, general and by-elections, but also internal races like nominations and leadership races. Before we wrap up here, you're involved in the Conservative leadership race through looking at the candidates and talking to them. If you want to give a plug to how people can find your information, I know a lot would probably appreciate it.
Yeah, so with the Conservative Party of Canada leadership race, obviously one needs to be a member of the party, which costs $15. And they have until May 15th, so a couple of days here until midnight local time to purchase a membership. So I encourage all pro-lifers out there, whether you normally vote for the Conservatives in an election or not, to get involved to make sure that the pro-life candidates who are running for the leadership race actually win, because that's the only way to vote for them. So you can visit our website. It starts rightnow.ca. We have a tab there called CPC Leadership 2020. It has all the information there for the leadership race, timelines, how it works, how the point system works. But a cool thing that I think that we do is that we interview all the candidates, or at least the ones that are willing to talk to us, for the leadership race. And we interview them on kind of, a little bit of personal stuff about them individually, but also, what they plan to do for our pro-life issues, so their pro-life platform and policies. We have on their voting records from their time as a member of parliament or member of provincial parliament or whatever provincial legislature they've sat in, as well as their winnability factor. How many caucus members do they have supporting them? Have they been have a parliamentary leadership role, like a cabinet minister or speaker of the House? How big is their social media following? So we have all that together, and we weight it together, have a little score system, come up with a score, and come up with a recommended ranked ballot, because it's a ranked ballot system. So if you want more information on that and how to get involved, that's the place to go.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Co-founder of RightNow, Scott Hayward, joining me on the line. Best of luck fighting against the bureaucrats in this, which is an important fight. I know we've said it, but it bears repeating. It's not just about you. I think all groups and individuals that want to engage in the political process this affects. So thank you very much, and all the best to you, Scott.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.